When speaking in reference of the idea of public funding, the question was raised, is public funding necessary for the arts? I am not sure that question as a single question fulfills what it would take to answer something like that. Does public funding imply public ownership? Because based upon what my experiences have been in Columbus, everything that it appears the public or some collective funds ends up being something that's treated like it's a shared public property. And if you start getting into public property issues, which is like public domain, eminent domain issues, that can be murky territory. It can be dangerous territory, particularly for the artists and creative talents themselves, especially. Most of the people that are talking about the numbers associated with cultural assets and venues are people who are actually not the creatives themselves. And usually it ends up being something about brokering more of an audience of people than making sure that within that context, they also provide adequate funding for the artists themselves to be able to continue their work. Part of the great challenge is determining who is actually or should be considered a legitimate artist. What does that mean? And what do people believe that the arts actually means in an area like this? Most favor right now has been given in terms of funding to the performance and theatric arts. But the arts are actually composed of far more things than only those particular focal points. It's just that those particular focal points have larger venues that convene more regularly. When you invest in something like the River Center or some arena or some auditorium or amphitheater or whatever the space is, a gymnasium, a stadium, whatever it is that has a lot of people in there at once, usually when people are looking at the arts, they're looking at the economic bottom line that can be obtained as a result of the art. They're not really looking at what it takes to make sure that the art is adequately represented as well. So artists kind of get shammed a lot of time. The people who actually make the venue possible by utilizing their talent or ability, they get shafted all the time. And so if you're asking whether or not public funding is necessary, well, sure, it is. But it also depends on what the plan is for distribution of those economics. It takes a lot of things to put on cultural venues. It's not just a person that has a talent or who created something. It takes a lot of things in today's society to do a cultural venue when you're talking about generating something that can be an economic gain. You're looking at what the people actually need to do what they do. You're looking at what it's going to take to accommodate the guests that are going to be at this venue. You're looking at what it's going to take to keep them safe. You're looking at what it's going to take to make sure they have a comfortable experience once they're inside. And that costs money. Security, safety, being ushers, and all of that kind of stuff, that contributes to the economic bottom line. But none of it would be possible, is what I'm arguing. You wouldn't need security. You would need an usher. You would need refreshments. You would need an auditorium, an audience, or anything if it wasn't for the fact that somebody had some unique talent or somebody created something that could be utilized as a reason to bring all of those people together in that venue at once. And when you're talking about the arts, we've allowed the idea of the arts to become too politically correct in the sense that art is not being allowed to be something that moves the community forward, where something about it contributes to a different thought process, to a different kind of context, a different kind of outlook on the world, or something that the people can walk out with that's not something they have already experienced or that they already know. Columbus is big about just doing what they've done the same way over and over and over and over until it becomes insanity. And it's not just at cultural venues. If you're just going to give the same people who already get everything or who have been getting everything the whole time, everything again, at everybody's expense, what changes? And so when you're talking about public funding, that's a presumption that there's equal distribution of where the funding goes in the first place. Who's getting supported and who isn't. Some people don't consider some things that are art, art. Everybody has their opinion about what they want to believe art should or should not be. Then you've got all of these other issues they invest in about, what they want their children to consider art, what they want their church to consider art. Art has been used in many ways other than just the traditional venues. You can see it in corporations. You can see it in institutions. You can see it within organizations. You can see it within churches. You can see it in funeral homes, in places that you never thought some quality art might be. Some of the most expensive and most valuable art that can be found are hidden in these places that I have described, and they might not necessarily be in a museum. They might not necessarily be in a gallery. See, a cultural asset is only valuable because of the allure that you can center around that asset to make people interested in being a part of it or seeing it. And some things they don't even know they will enjoy if or until they actually go be a part of it. There are things that people reject on the basis of face value just because, well, that's not familiar to me. I don't know what that is. Or I've heard bad things about that person, or I don't believe in that kind of stuff. That's not what art actually is. Art is supposed to be what inspires the people to go learn about or experience or explore something that perhaps they have not already experienced or explored, to make something grow forward. And all of it is not going to be something that's safe. All of it is not going to be something that everybody is familiar with. See, they're big about rejecting things on the basis that, well, I don't know what that is. I've never seen anything like that. That's not familiar to me. I don't think that's art, because they don't really have any true art awareness. I don't want to say any. That's too extreme. But they have a deficiency in art awareness. So they don't even really understand, in many respects, what art really means. And so when you're using the term the arts, who are you talking about? Because the majority of time when you hear people talking about these issues of finances, you don't hear the artists themselves being included. They have a selective process of who they fund here and who they don't. And a lot of places are that way. But really, funding, when you're talking about a public perspective, is supposed to be representative of everybody and everything that's in a given community. You're supposed to be able to see that some distribution of those economics, that funding, went to some specific venue to make sure that everybody was accounted for, or that everybody had an opportunity to be a part of it. Now, I want to use a sports analogy, and then I'm going to close here, about how culture systems work and what it takes to generate the kind of audience, the kind of following, the kind of awareness to make cultural venues, whether they're arts, sports, politics, or whatever, valuable. Back in the day when the sport of basketball was much more popular than it is now, in spite of the fact that there's tremendous popularity now, a lot of the things surrounding that sport ended up at the playgrounds, on the blacktop, when people are working out for the summer or working out for whatever reason at the ball courts. There was always this one main court where the people who were supposed to be the ones that could really get it done and play some ball played. And there would be this list of people who had the next game to compete against whoever won the game between the two teams that are competing on the court at any given time. And that person could go into like a lottery pick and tell the people that were surrounding the court, because there were a lot of them that wanted to play or watch or whatever they were there for. And he would ask people, look, you want to run with me? 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 He's picked these people that he wants to be the other 4 players amongst the 5 that are going to go back on this court and compete against the team that won. But there's always this 6th person, or maybe this 7th person, who he had also asked if they wanted to run, and he didn't pick them. Or he had already picked the people that he wanted to go with first before he got to them. And so now it becomes a situation where everybody's not getting to compete. Or the next person in line might not want the people that didn't get picked to run with them. Now everybody's sharing this court. Everybody that can play is on this court. Everybody that knows about the game, loves the game, and that's part of that culture is on the court. Everybody can see everybody showcase their talent at once, whether you win or lose. And so the way that the game evolved to make sure that everybody could play, because just because you were standing on the sideline doesn't mean you weren't the best player. It's just that you didn't get picked. They started to make more courts. And then that way you could have multiple games running simultaneously. Everybody's on the court active. Everybody's interchanging between the courts. Okay, you're not running on court 1 this time. Instead, you got picked up on court 3, and everybody's running. Everybody's exercising. Or maybe on one day, the courts are set up by levels. These are the priority players up here. These are the Division I level, NBA level. These are the ones that are college level. These are the ones that are high school level. Or sometimes everybody's just running simultaneously for whatever reason it is. And then you got this other court where the people that are just out there exercising, the old dogs who used to play. Or you might have a court where the girls want to go run their game the way they want to run their game. Or the women want to go play some ball. But everybody is in the venue together at the same time. You're playing on different courts, but everybody's there. Everybody you need to see. Everything that's going on is part of that culture. You have all of these people that just came to watch, came to talk, came to socialize, came to sell something, or whatever it is they're there for. Everybody knows who was there. Everybody knows who goes there. And so you've got this big collective of people that are interacting in this relationship, which is a cultural event, to come and play some ball. And you might not be on court 1, but you are on court 2, or you are on court 3, or whatever court you're on, but everybody knows you're there on that scene. So if something spectacular happens, or if something of any kind happens, everybody's there. Everybody's a part of it at once. When you're talking about cultural venues, it's really no different. See, in bigger cities, they set up things to make sure people are included. Even if you can't afford it, they make sure to invest in something to assure that the people that would not otherwise be represented have an opportunity to get in there and be a part of the cultural experiences if they really want to be there. It's not something where everybody's separated. Columbus is big about separating everything. This is where the black people go for their art. This is where the white people go for their art. This is where the women go for their art. Here's where the gay people go for their art. It's not really inclusive. And when you're talking about funding, if you're going to divide everything, you're probably going to make it more difficult to fund creativity and fund the arts because you have everything so divided. Now you have to come up with more to make sure everybody is served and represented. If there was equal distribution, or more equal distribution at least, That would be a part of the hurdle that you wouldn't have to deal with. A lot of the people that sell art do not create art. A lot of the people sell their venues based upon what artists create. And so what I'm saying is that if you're talking about funding and you're not actually hearing from any artist, I'm not sure you're having a proper dialogue. So the bigger question is not whether or not public funding is needed, because it is needed. If you get to share with somebody's experience, if you get to share somebody's talent, if something's been put together to bring you together, well, sure, it's worth investing in. But the more important question is not whether or not public funding is needed, it's how and why public funding is needed. How and why the people that are selected are being funded. Who doesn't get funded? Who does get funded? These are the greater questions than the question of whether or not public funding is necessary. Of course, some degree of public funding is necessary. It takes money to do these things. It takes effort. This whole culture of trying to give the artist the minimum that you can give them and get the maximum profit or asset gain from it is a dead end. If you're just going to exploit artists to keep your own doors open and not make sure that the artists can continue to do their work and continue to build something to help keep your doors open, something about that is wrong. And then there's also this culture that I should mention about artists backbiting other artists. And that usually comes as a result of not being adequately represented, generally speaking. Now, the last question really still has to do with what do people here consider the arts? Some people don't want to fund anything that they personally don't consider art. What do they consider the arts here, for starters? Because if you're talking about funding something and you don't have a general dialogue with people about what their awareness and understanding of what the arts actually are in the first place, who is that question really for? And are the people asking the questions and answering the questions, really qualified to be the ones in that position? I don't know what they want to achieve here creatively, but I know that if you're going to do the same thing that you've already done, and if you're not going to give artists the freedom to do what they need to do to show who they are as a unique talent, you're not going to really get that far. It doesn't really matter how much you build or how much you fund. You can put an incredible amount of funding into something that doesn't really work, or something that might only work for one day. You're really supposed to be funding things that will build relationships and bridges to other things in the future. And how do you do that if you don't make sure that the artists are getting their fair share? And then the question becomes, okay, well, what's your fair share? They're saying, well, wait, we're the ones who gave you this audience. We're the one who showed everybody who you are. We're the ones that, made everybody become aware of you. We're supposed to get the most. But how would you be able to tell somebody who somebody is if they hadn't done something to give you the ability to be able to do so? And so to me, if you haven't considered how the artists have been funded or are being funded, how are you really having a dialogue about whether or not public funding is needed? Is that a rhetorical question? Whether public funding is needed? Perhaps, we need to consider this because, honestly, if artists had adequate resources, I'm sure they could fund some of their own venues, for starters. And then, like when you're talking about what the arts actually means, why is everybody speaking for what art is supposed to mean except the artist around here? And I just think this whole idea of public domain and public property is murky territory. Because if you're talking about public ownership of somebody, that means the person doesn't own themselves. That means you're starting to constitutionalize them adversely in a way that the law was never meant to, where you're saying that, okay, what's being done here is for the people, by the people, but it's really not by the people. It's for the people, but it's not really by the people. That's supposed to be a shared investment. And so if it's for the people, shouldn't the funding represent the for the people part and the by the people part rather than for the people, by the people? Because if the people are claiming that they're investing in it, well, they're not the ones that created the art, right? And so if you're just going to come up with a public way to say we'll make our own artists and we'll make our own venues and localize it, obviously that's not really what art is supposed to be. I try to fall into a place where my art can be represented wherever I am, anywhere in the world. You've got to do something that's bigger than the art and bigger than the place where you are for art to really be viable. And so a lot of people just want entertainment. They want to know what they can do with themselves and their money when they're not working. That's all the arts and cultural entertainment system is about. What people do or what you can get them to want to do with their money when they're not working. How are they going to entertain themselves? Whether it's at the shopping mall, whether it's at church, whether it's at an auditorium, an amphitheater, a stadium, or wherever they're going to spend their money. What do people want to do and what do they want to experience when they go? And art is a part of all of that. Without the artist, none of those venues would mean anything at all. You see art everywhere, all the time, and people don't even realize it. And so I feel that to have an adequate dialogue, there must be some discussion about whether or not artists themselves are adequately funded. There has to be. It can't just be the people that sell artists and that sell venues are the ones having a dialogue about it. Because if the artists are making what the people that sell stuff do possible, it's only fair that the artist should be adequately funded as well. But who decides who's an artist and on what basis? A lot of people do a lot of things that they claim fall into the creative realm that give them the ability to call themselves artists, but they're not really artists. So this is a very complicated question. It's not that simple. And I don't believe anybody should be owned as a piece of public property. I mean, you should share it at least. That's why they make contracts. That's why they make opportunities. You know, when somebody from any other profession comes in, they're going to sign a contract. They're going to talk about their fringe benefits, what's going to happen when they retire, or if they retire, what's going to happen with a severance. They're talking about some life security. They're acting like artists are supposed to be freelance people who take these precarious jobs, these menial jobs, and take any little pennies thrown at them, and then they go get the maximum assets off of what they can attain off of what that artist did. So that if that artist does something incredible that generates a massive amount of finances, they get left out of the cut and they are the ones that made it possible. These things challenge the music industry, Hollywood, and everywhere else. Hollywood knows that it takes money to make something incredible and seat people in theaters and distribute it and do all of that kind of stuff. And so if you're not thinking on the right frequency in the first place, you're not really talking about the arts. You're just talking about how to use the arts to get the money. And if you're going to get some money from the arts, the artists should be getting some money too, is all I'm arguing. And who's qualified and deserves it? It's not just about what's made. It's about the kind of person. So these people are taking things to injure somebody's character or reputation to make them seem unattractive to be invested in for financial purposes, to turn people away from them. Artist Vincent van Gogh, one of the most celebrated artists in the history of mankind, was only able to sell one painting, The Red Vineyard, when he was living. And they have all of these paintings that he created that cultural institutions and all kinds of other places have invested in for hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. And he was only able to sell one painting. Why was he not adequately funded? I mean, they were more interested not in what he needed to create his work. They were more interested in owning his soul and his psychology and treating him like a piece of public property. And so we haven't even really had any artists in this dialogue. If you're not talking about the money, what are you talking about as relates to the cultural arts? And if you're talking about the money, How can you be talking about money for everybody except the people who create or contribute to the cultural bottom line that makes it possible? And that's all I'm arguing. I did some testing, and I did some of the testing very voluntarily, and I did some of the testing out of mere need here, because I've never had the kind of needs associated with the arts that I've had in Columbus, Georgia, where you've got to do something that you don't really want to have to do just to survive, compromising your art, compromising the integrity of what you've invested in your profession. What I don't understand is how people want to nickel and dime everybody. And then you think it's okay for you to take what you nickel and dime somebody for and go write your own version of history, your own version of what your relationship with somebody is, what you claim to be your knowledge and experiences with somebody. And you don't have anything that proves that this relationship existed. You're not hearing from the actual artist. You can't show that you actually paid something commensurate to the artist for what you're taking from them. And so if we're just going to be ripping one another off and exploiting one another, what do you expect to come of it when you bring up a topic like public funding? And if we're talking about public funding, why aren't we talking about other forms of alternative funding, like private funding or international funding or something that comes from other alternative sources for finances? It can be organizational, institutional, or corporate funding. There are all kinds of things that can happen to get money into the flow to make things possible. For example, you can fund an artist because you want to do something for philanthropy to help them continue their work. And that's good. And it's needed and it's necessary. But you can also fund an artist in exchange for something that you know this artist can create to give validity to something that you have going on. A cultural event, a venue for entertainment, for sports, or for whatever it is. You can find ways to make sure artists get legitimate opportunity to earn some money to continue what they're doing. But it seems like everybody wants the money for themselves or for whatever their purpose is, and they want the artist to always have to take the leftovers. And unless those are some pretty damn good leftovers, you know that most of the time people only leave behind what they don't want. And that's usually not going to be enough unless you're just trying to talk about giving somebody something that can just help them survive. You need to be able to do more than just survive to really practice your medium and get it to the level that you need for it to be. And who deserves to get that opportunity? Who deserves the trust to take those finances and do what they're supposed to do with it? Some people don't even consider art work. Okay. A lot of people in this area still don't even consider art work. So when you're talking about public funding, who are you talking about? What are you actually talking about here? Because an artist might get mistreated just because they're an artist. They think that if you're not throwing bricks, cutting somebody's grass, and doing all of this stuff that's blue collar labor, which are legitimate professions, which I feel that every person should know how to do and be able to do and be willing to do. But if your profession that you studied for and practiced for to contribute to your society falls into a creative medium, you shouldn't have to be insulted by people who have not progressed beyond anything that they know other than blue collar labor. You shouldn't have to be assaulted by them in the ways that they do here. And that has to do with cultural awareness. They don't even realize somebody designed every tool that they have. That was an artist, because they have no awareness. They have no competence and no comprehension about that level of things. The creative use of everything started with somebody creative. And it might not be through creativity as an actual artist, as a profession, but it required creative talent, which falls into the same category. Sometimes the best artists that you find are the ones who didn't even know they were artists, who weren't trying to be. I'm a person, for example, I was never trying to be an artist. I didn't really know what that meant when I started off down here. I just knew I liked being creative. They told me that was an artist as I started to progress and grow up. Oh, that means you're an artist. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't doing it because I knew anything about it or had any awareness about it. It was something that was a gift to me. It was a talent. And then I went ahead and developed it to use it for the things that I thought it could be used for. And it's not just something where you see some guy throwing paint with a beret on at a canvas and sitting in some room somewhere. They want you to look like you're tormented, like you're filled with this angst and this anguish, like you're supposed to be this tormented person where something about your art has more to do with your mental health and your psychiatry than just the fact that you're expressing your creative talent and your ability. And if you're not hearing from artists, I'm not sure you're having a fair dialogue. I'm not sure you're really asking a question that's not rhetorical, because most of the people are not really in it because of the artist. They'll take anybody who can create something that they think they can use to get the money. You got to find the people that are really invested in trying to bring artists out who present something because of their art or who they are as a person that makes somebody's investment in a cultural venue worth it. This place has to move to a point where they're ready to experience new things and explore new things other than just keep doing the same thing that they've already done and rejecting what they're unfamiliar with. You can't really do art in a place, for example, where they use religion to censor and oppress people. You've got to have a certain kind of creative freedom because art helps the faith community evolve as well. Art is an incredible ministry. But people with no awareness or limited knowledge, or people trying to prevent people from having freedom, would never possibly know what it can be and how it can be utilized. Art can be used and is included in a lot more than people realize. And so if you're talking about money and you're not talking about the artists who make the money possible or the need for the money possible, something's just not right about that conversation. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to anybody. I'm saying if we're going to raise the question, perhaps we need to look at the question more deeply. And perhaps we need to consider whether or not the question is the right question, or if it's one of many other questions that need to be asked. But when it's said and done, it's going to come down to more than just asking questions and speculating. It's going to come down to actions. It's going to come down to people having trust and taking risks and investments to produce something that turns into a cultural venue that can not only be shared here, but anywhere else and have cultural validity to bring in some money. If you ain't making no money, none of it means anything. And so I don't know what it is about this place that's trying to figure out how to keep artists from making money rather than create opportunities for the artists and everybody else together to continue to make money. This whole starving artist mentality is insane to me. But if you want to use the artist to make money for yourself, even though you're starving the artist, some kind of way they think that's acceptable. And something about that is fundamentally wrong. So I'm just not sure that on the basis of the question, from what I saw reported, that we're really having the dialogue right. And I don't know for sure enough people who have credibility are asking the questions and answering the questions. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I'm just being real from the perspective of the people who invest their lives and their talents in making what these people do possible. They need to be more respectful to the creatives.